All right, well, it's time for us to begin our peak of the week for Wednesday, December the
This is November the
18th?
18th.
18th.
It's
Yeah,
November
that's the
18th.
day you got back from the far west, didn't it?
Yeah.
All right, well, we're glad that you're all here. I'm glad you made it back, we're on lesson number 3 of peak of the week, Peter's ultimate test. Peter's ultimate test. Today's message is going to highlight the absolute essence of Peter's life and the development into an effective leader, how he comes to be the effective leader that he is when he comes into the kingdom of Christ. We're going to talk about his heartbreak and the difficult times that he had. We talked a little bit about that last week, and all we talked about Peter's facing this ultimate test and the fear and the disgrace that comes along with it, and we'll talk more about that as we go along. But we'll also discover that his ultimate test actually brought him to the point of reinstatement to the Lord. If you remember last week, we talked about the fact that when Peter was brought to see Jesus, that the thing that he says that you are Simon, son of Jonah. From this point on, your name's going to be Cephas, which means rock or stone. And then later, how they told him that upon the rock, he was going to build and give him the keys to the kingdom and build the church. So Peter had a lot to live up to, and Peter was a very, very ambitious person, a person who was not afraid to talk to somebody. He put his both feet forward and jumped right in there, and sometimes it worked out, and sometimes it didn't. Even a couple of times last week, we realized the last couple of weeks that Peter actually rebuked Jesus for saying some of the things that Jesus said. So, he became one of the original 12 apostles, and he was given some precise instructions when they were sent out on the limited commission. Some of those instructions covered in Matthew chapter 10 and verse 32 and 33. It goes like this: "Therefore, whoever confesses me before men, him will I also confess before my Father who is in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, him will I deny before my Father who is in heaven." That particular passage continues on throughout the New Testament, and that we have to recognize Jesus. And one of the things that Peter did was told, along with the other apostles, was to go and give this message to the people so they might know it. These are among Jesus's most potent and challenging words, to be able to confess Jesus Christ. You know, we probably don't see that today, and the reason we don't see that is because when we think about confessing Jesus, we say, well, everybody believes Jesus. Yeah, I believe in Jesus. But it's deeper than that. It's more than that. It's more than that because in so many different ways we are denying Jesus. When we decide we'd rather go play ball than attend a worship service or a Bible study, we're denying Jesus. We're denying that what he has for us is worth anything. This is worth more than Jesus. And that's what it comes down to, doesn't it? It boils right down to that. What's worth more? Serving God, studying about Jesus Christ, or going to a ball game? What's more important, going to a family reunion or coming to worship the Lord? What's more important, going to work or worshiping the Lord? Now, I realize that we look at things differently in this society. And we say, well, a person's got to go to work, and so the church usually excuses that or recognizes that. But I'm not sure the Lord does. But at any rate, this particular warning rings true to that day and time and to today as well. Peter heard these words of Jesus and probably preached them to others as well, as he was told to go and to preach them to others as well. And so he did. Peter never in his wildest imagination did he think in the 3.5 years that he followed Jesus around that he would be the one, or he would be one of the ones who would forsake Jesus. Never crossed his mind. It never crossed his mind at all. John chapter 1, verse 42, and he brought him to Jesus. Now when Jesus looked at him and said, "You are Simon, the son of Jonah, you shall be called Cephas," which is translated stone. Jesus had big plans for Peter. From the very day that he met Peter, he had big plans for Peter. In Luke 22 and verse 33, "Lord, I'm ready to go with you to prison and even to death." Matthew records that as even if all are made to stumble because of you, I'll never stumble because of you. And later in Matthew chapter 26 and verse 35, "Even if I have to die with you, I will not deny you." You know, those things, those passages right there fall into the realm of things I wish I hadn't said, because we have the benefit of hindsight to be able to look back and see what actually took place. As we noted last week in the lesson, Peter struggled to grow. He had a pretty big ups and downs struggling to grow. It was difficult for Peter. Being rambunctious and one who was outspoken, one who would jump in with both feet, even when he didn't know how deep it was, rebuking Jesus, all those things, and from time to time even being boastful about certain things as well, right? And we fast forward from that particular thing of last week to the Lord's Supper. The meal's finished, and Jesus warns them all that of his impending death. You see, it's not like Jesus hadn't told them. In fact, Jesus had told them on several occasions later in his ministry what was going to happen, that he was going to be arrested. He was going to be arrested. He was told on several occasions that he was going to be tried and convicted and sentenced to death. He was going to die, and he was going to be and he even told him that he was going to be resurrected. But when you are being told things by somebody and it's all new to you, sometimes you don't really listen. You don't really absorb it. You don't really know what he was talking about, and that's pretty much what the case was here with them. Little did Peter realize that this would become the ultimate test that was going to go through. And what was going to happen is that what was going to happen when Jesus was arrested. Was the apostles going to break and run, or was they going to fight? Was it going to hide or betray Jesus or disown him or deny him or any number of 1,000 things that could be done when Jesus was arrested? There's Peter swinging the sword, cutting off the servant's ear. And Jesus, being the type of person that he was, healed the servant's ear. Well, to get the full story of what took place there in that time, you would have to read all of Matthew chapter 26. And we're not going to read all of that at this particular moment. But we are going to begin in verse 69 of Matthew chapter 26. And we're going to read a little bit. So I hope you have your Bibles with you and you open them up to Matthew chapter 26 and verses 69 through 75. Now Peter sat outside in the courtyard. And a servant girl came to him and saying, "You also were with Jesus of Galilee." But he denied it before them all, saying, "I don't know what you're saying." And when he was going out to the gateway, another girl saw him and said to those who were with him, "That fellow was with Jesus of Nazareth." But again he denied it with an oath this time, "I do not know the man." A little later, those who stood by came up to Peter and said, "Surely you also are one of them, for your speech betrays you." Then he began to curse and swear and saying, "I don't know the man." And immediately the rooster crowed. If you ever wondered whether cursing and swearing was wrong or not, right here's an example of someone who follows Jesus or doesn't follow Jesus. would be the one who would be cursing. A person who follows Jesus wouldn't do that. So he goes, and Peter remembered the word of Jesus who had said to him, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." And so he went out and wept bitterly. The Bible records many significant failures throughout the Genesis, the Old Testament and the New Testament. Think of David's sin with Bathsheba, a very significant disappointment. Job's wife saying, "Well, just curse God and die." King Saul, the first king of Israel, ending his own life in rebellion and suicide. Even Judas' betrayal is one of the great disappointments as well. But I dare say that next to the cross itself, Peter, the rock, disowning the Lord, has to rank as one of the greatest disappointments that's ever recorded in history. And Peter knew it. All Jesus had to do was look at Peter when the cock crowed. And Peter knew what he'd done. Why? How could this have happened to Peter the rock? How is it possible? Well, let's look at, I think I got 5 here, 5 reasons for us to understand and to learn the great lesson from each one of them. You want to know why and how Peter could do the thing that he did? Your letter A on your fill in the blank, sheer fear. We find Peter goes full circle, reverting to the same problem he had when he's walking on the water with Jesus. Why did he not, was unable to continue walking on the water? He was walking on the water with Jesus. Why was he unable to continue? Because he looked around and became fearful. He became fearful. He became very fearful. And as a result of being fearful, he began to sink and to fall. Fear overtook him then, and it did now. He could be quite a bold, courageous, adventurous type of person. To Peter's credit, on this walking on the water thing, he did get out of the boat. What do you think about that? You're in the middle of the Sea of Galilee. You drown, you fall in, and you drown. But he got out of the boat. But he didn't keep his eyes on Jesus.
That's what they always say. When you take your eyes off Jesus, you sink.
Sheer fear was one of the reasons that caused him to deny Jesus. And we better be aware of that. Because there's going to come a time, and it seems like it's going to be sooner than later, that we're going to have to make a decision. What are we going to decide? To follow Jesus? To follow his word? Or to follow something some man tells us? He was still very, very human. The letter B there is human. We find him at this particular stage in his development still showing some signs of human weakness. While Jesus prays his heart out, Peter goes away and goes to sleep. Jesus comes back and confronts him. Jesus, when he's confronted by his accusers, he goes back to his old life again and pre-Jesus years, and begins to rain down curses on them. These excuses for his behavior, much like we do at times as well. At times you can hit your finger with a nail and say, "Oh, boy, that hurt." Hit another finger with a nail and, "Man, what's the matter with me?" You do it the 3rd time, and there may be some words you wish you hadn't said come out of your mouth. We are human. He was human. And being human, he made mistakes. 3rd, his bravado, it seems, was just a facade. You know, that's what it is very often, isn't it? A person who's boisterous and speak out and says things and, everything to this, that's a facade. It's a way of putting up a wall between you and between us and other people. If we act like we know a lot, people might think we know a lot. How many times has you tried to tell somebody something? Oh, well, I already knew that. I know some people that every time you try to share some information or say something to someone, oh, I knew that already. Oh, okay, now you know it again. But, it's a facade. Could it be that Peter felt strong and brave when he was in the presence of Jesus? But he found weakness as weak as a kitten when he was on his own. Number 4, Peter was hanging with the wrong crowd. In Mark's account, in the Bible says in Mark chapter 14 and verse 54, but Peter followed him at a distance right into the courtyard of the high priest, and he sat down with the servants and warmed himself by the fire. Sat down by the servants of the high priest to warm himself by the fire. While Jesus was being falsely charged and beaten and spit upon, and the guards beating him with his fist and doing all the things that he did, Peter's down below in the courtyard by the fire. And the servant girl comes over and identifies him, warming himself. See, there's 2 problems here. First of all, keeping himself at a distance from Jesus makes him weaker. And secondly, hanging with the wrong crowd feeds on that weakness. And you begin to act differently. Well, the 5th one is, it could be the concept that Jesus' kingdom was still clouding. The idea of the kingdom of Jesus was still clouding in his mind, because all this time the disciples and the apostles and the people in Judea was thinking that there was going to be an actual physical, literal kingdom on David's throne there in Jerusalem, and the Jews are going to be top of the mark. But that wasn't what Jesus' kingdom was going to be. Peter had the boldness to protect Jesus when he was arrested by attacking one of the soldiers and cutting off his ear. Even the midst of the gruesome act and the tension of that moment, he was defending Jesus. Jesus stayed true to himself by healing the young man's ear. Peter's action was acting more physically than spiritually. Jesus has spent 3.5 years with these men trying to get them to think spiritually. Preachers and teachers and elders spend lifetimes with congregations trying to get them to think and make decisions based on the spiritual rather than the physical. You see, it's much more than just something to do. We have to make a decision every day based on the physical or the spiritual. And if we are following Christ and want to follow Christ as close as we can, the one thing we want to be sure of is that the spiritual is satisfied first. Saw a meme on Facebook the other day, if I can remember what it said. Something along the lines of, church should be your reason for not going to something else. That's a pretty good meme, I think. Because a lot of people use something else to excuse them from attending worship service or Bible study or any number of other things. The church should be the reason that we can't do the other things, rather than we can't do the other things. We don't want to have to go to church. A little girl one time wasn't used to her parents taking them to church. their parents came and stayed with them for a little bit. Sunday rolled around, and they got up and they got dressed and they went to a worship service, or Bible study and a worship service. And she wasn't real used to going to Bible study. If they went at all, they would go to a worship service occasionally. And so they went to both of them, and then they went out and had a good Sunday afternoon. And Sunday evening come around, and people began to mill around and get ready to motivate towards the car. She says, "Where are we going?" And the mother or father or somebody said, "We're going to go to church." Again? I had not gone to church that evening, So, sometimes people make their decisions based on the physical. What's more fun? What's more conducive to my life? What'll make me rich? What'll make me more popular? What'll make me any number of physical things better? But can anyone deny that attending a worship service draws one closer to God? That attending Bible study brings one closer to His Word and understanding of His Word? Even if the lesson is something you'd already heard 1,000 times, it brings us closer. There were still some disconnects among the apostles as to the spiritual nature of Jesus' kingdom. But regardless of the reason why Peter did what he did, here's a couple of questions. Do you think his actions, even denial of Jesus, was part of God's plan? Now keep in mind, Jesus had already told him what he was going to do before he did it. Already told him. You're going to deny me 3 times before the rooster crows. He denied him 3 times. The rooster crowed. Do you think that was part of God's plan for Peter? Do you think it was?
I think he knew Peter's heart. He knew Peter wasn't quite there yet. And so after he denied him and the roosters crowed, it struck Peter in the head, he knows me. And I disappointed him.
You know what you just described there? You made a perfect description of the difference between predestination and foreknowledge. That's what you did. You see, people say, well, he knew what he was going to do before he did it, and therefore, God made... No, God didn't... Peter could have done anything he wanted to do. He didn't have to do what he did. Jesus knew what he was going to do. He knew how he was bent, what he was planning to do, what he would probably have done. But he didn't make him do it. Just like Judas. You say, well, why? If he knew Judas was going to betray him, why did he pick him to be an apostle and treat him like all the rest of them? Because Judas didn't. The person who betrayed him could just as easily have been Peter, James, John, Andrew, Matthew, any number of them. But it was Judas. And Jesus knew it.
The heart.
But that's foreknowledge. That's not predestination. Predestination is where they have no choice. No choice whatsoever in that particular thing. So that was a good answer. Very, very, very good. I appreciate that.
But when Peter did do that, it's like his blinders went off and he was able to see the big picture, so to speak.
He understood. The crucifixion begins to take place. The whole city's in an uproar. The disciples have fled. Jesus is dead and buried. And the only disciples that remain at the scene were 3 women and 1 apostle. And that was John. The rest were gone. Or at least they weren't in the near vicinity anyway. They were afraid. They were afraid. They were human and they were afraid of what would happen to them. If they killed Jesus, the leader, what would happen to them? Judas had betrayed the master and had ended his life. Here's a question. Could Judas have been forgiven? Of course he could. Judas sinned. Jesus came into the world to seek and to save those which are lost. Judas was lost. Judas could have been saved. But he chose to take his life instead. That look that Jesus gave Peter was like stabbing him in the heart over and over again. Peter will never get that look of Jesus out of his mind. It'll be there the rest of his life. You know how you see somebody and you have something, you look them in the eye, and you both just know. Peter is going to know that look the rest of his life. 3 years in the presence of the Son of God, all of it seemed down the drain. In a few moments of fear, he threw away all the experiences he had witnessed in the greatness of Jesus. All the things that Jesus had done, the things that are written in the book of John that were in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that John says was to help people to believe that Jesus was the Christ. These things were written for that. And the miracles and the signs and the wonders and the healing and the resurrection and all of those things Peter has thrown away. He had let down the one he had personally confessed. Well, you're the Son of the living God. Well, now, Peter confessed that. Jesus says to him, great, well done. You've said something well. And upon that confession that Jesus is the Son of God, that confession is what's going to build the church. Upon that rock, the church is going to be built. The Son of the living God. Peter can't believe his own weaknesses. He can't fathom how the courage he had shown before had melted away so quickly. Long gone are the statements that Jesus had shared about his death and that he would be raised the third day. All Peter could see at that particular moment was abject failure. You know what? We probably have more in common with Peter in that state of mind than we do with Peter in Acts chapter 2 when he stands before the people and preaches Jesus Christ. Because we understand abject failure. We have failed over and over again to confess Jesus Christ. We have failed even though we understand and believe the Son of the living God is Jesus Christ. We've sold him short numbers of times. His hope and ministry, whatever Jesus meant by the keys to the kingdom, that's all gone as far as Peter's concerned. It's gone. His statue as one of the apostles feels like it's all over with. It's empty. It's done with. His energy, his enthusiasm, his boisterous attitude and thing. He's dejected. He doesn't want to talk to anybody. He doesn't want to be around anybody. His life in that little cocoon. Remember we talked about the butterfly and the cocoon, the cocoon and the butterfly. His little life in that is just dark. There's no butterfly transforming there. Peter could have joined Judas and taken his own life, but he couldn't bring himself to do that. He couldn't bring himself to do that. Peter still had that, while dejected, he still had that glimmer of hope like we do. We still have that glimmer of hope when we fail. Now, he could have gone off and wallowed in self-pity and lived the rest of his life with regret and gut-wrenching guilt. But God wasn't finished with Peter yet. God's not finished with Peter yet. And God's not finished with you and I yet either. When we stumble and fall, God's not finished with us yet. So a couple of things happened to set the stage for next week's lesson about Peter and the butterfly. One thing was extremely important. And the first thing that's extremely important is that he stayed in contact with the other disciples, the other apostles. We know that because in a number of occasions, the Bible mentions the 11 returning and remaining as apostles after Judas' death, and certainly that included Peter. In fact, Peter was one of the 2 disciples that actually ran to the tomb. Now later John would stick around, and Peter would leave, but they were there. But the 11 stayed together. And they decided, well, let's go fishing. And as we see, Peter has now come full cycle. In John chapter 21, we find some deja vu. Whether I said that Southern style or English style or what it was, deja vu. Moments when the disciples saw their way to the Sea of Galilee and decided to go do some fishing. To make a long story short, it involves some fishing failures, another miraculous catch of fish, and Peter jumping into the water. You remember the story. It was at this time that Jesus made his appearance clear to them. Jesus is alive. He's been resurrected from the dead. And the abject poverty of spirit that Peter was feeling was beginning to be ignited to a raging fire. That hope, that little tiny little spark of hope that he had that kept him from taking his life is now becoming a raging fire. That hope is springing eternal in Peter. He's full of joy and surprise and relief and the hugs and the kisses and the fantastic breakfast of fish that they were enjoying with the Lord. The Lord is back. We were back. But is Peter back? What remains to this story of Peter's metamorphosis is about to take place when Jesus pulls him aside for an exclusive conversation. Well, is this where he takes him by the side and says, "You're fired"? Well, for that, you need to come back next week. For that, we need to come back next week and join us for our final lesson in this series to witness Peter's reinstatement to Christ, his fulfillment of the vision that Jesus had for him way back when he would come to and met him for the first time. Begin and see what is revealed in those chapters, in the first few chapters of the book of Acts. It'll be an exciting and encouraging, a faith-building story that we can relate to. Because every one of us have been where Peter was. Every one of us have felt we've let Jesus down. But Jesus has been resurrected from the dead. Jesus has ascended into heaven. Jesus has sent his word to teach us that forgiveness is part of what we can be. And so hope springs eternal. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Continue to hope. Continue to look forward to that day when we'll hear Jesus Christ. And remember, until we meet next week, this is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. You have any comments tonight that you'd like to make on this particular lesson? I know up to now I've done most of the talking, and we've kind of changed our format a little bit. We've been doing this filming thing. I've been doing it in my office, but we decided to tape it live, and so we're going to try that for a little while and see how that works out. But if you have any comments that you want to make, or any questions you want to ask, or anything of that sort, we'll be glad to have them. You know, you're not supposed to have any dead air here, folks. We need it.
Well, when, after the death and resurrection and Jesus appeared before him and Peter, you know, after the tomb and everything, he said, I'm gonna go fishing. So, you know, while they was out there, when they get back to land and Jesus had the fire go on and things like that, once again, 3 questions was put to Peter. And Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? And here's Peter's answer. Yea, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, Jesus said to Peter, tend my lambs. That was the first. Second, he said to him a second time, Jesus said to Peter second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter answered and said, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And Jesus said, shepherd my sheep. Jesus said a third time to Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, do you love me? And he said to Jesus, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And Jesus said to him, tend my sheep. There's 3 questions again to Peter about, you know, his knowing Jesus, loving Jesus. I find that interesting. Even after, you know, the death, that once again, Jesus and Peter have this conversation 3 times. He asked him.
Would you use that, take off on that particular idea right there? The next time that we're tempted, or the next time we have to make a decision about serving God in whatever direction it might be, or doing something else, ask yourself that question. Do I love Jesus? Well, we can rationalize that. Well, Jesus knows I love him, so I'm just going to go ahead and do this over here. Do we love Jesus? Jesus wants us to do this, but I want to do that. Which one am I going to do? How can I organize my life so that I'm doing what Jesus wants me to do? And what does Jesus want me to do? Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, mind, and soul, and thy brother as thyself. That's what Jesus wants us to do. Anybody have any other comments? It's quiet as a tomb in here. All right. Well, thank you all for tuning in, and thanks for listening to our lesson. If you have any comments, please send us your comments in an email. You can find the address on our website. We'll be glad to have you to respond to that. If you like the lesson that you heard, kind of share it with other people. Give us a like every now and then as well. We would appreciate hearing from you. Get a little feedback from you if you could. Let's take a few moments and pray as we close this out. Help us, Father, as we, from time to time, when our ups are up but our downs are down. Help us, Father, to always be up, but we know we won't. And help us, Father, to never be down, but we know we won't as well. Help us to always remember you and call upon your name, whether we're up or down, whether we're on serving you or whether we're not. Let us give you the glory. Let us call upon you for the help. And let us always, in every way possible, worship you and serve you to the best of our ability. Thank you for this story of Peter and for blessing us with it. Thank you for these folks who have come out here this evening in the weather and the cold, and we appreciate them being here with us. Thank you for bringing Jane home safely, and we thank you for what she has meant to her mother in the final days of her life. And bless us, Lord, as we continue to try to serve you. In Christ's name we pray, and amen.
Amen.